Good afternoon, Prime Minister and Ministers. On behalf of the Privy Council Office, our team, Carmen Keith, Hannah Willis, Portia Anani, Sydney Rolfe, and I, Sarah Stein, are here to present Building Strength at Home, a national security policy for a united Canada in a new world order. Next slide, please. Against a backdrop of accelerating global threats, such as climate change and public health crises, shifting global alliances and great power rivalries are changing the world order at a scale not seen since the Cold War. Amid this turmoil, Canadian sovereignty and democracy are vulnerable to an evolving and unpredictable world order. While the Government of Canada does have mechanisms in place to respond to national security threats, the broader national public service and Canadian public are unprepared. Next slide, please. The threats that Canada faces are complex and interlinked. In order to respond effectively to the many challenges that Canada faces, the most destabilizing threats must be addressed immediately. We have identified the four most urgent threats facing Canada. The first is the rapid spread of disinformation. In their 2025 Global Risks Report, the World Economic Forum identified disinformation as the most significant short-term global risk, citing its ability to undermine public trust and destabilize societies. In Canada's public inquiry into foreign interference, Justice Hogue states that information manipulation, whether foreign or not, poses the single biggest risk to our democracy. It is an existential threat. Public trust is foundational to democracy and an essential condition for all other national security initiatives by the Government of Canada to succeed. Therefore, addressing disinformation is a top priority in a new national security policy. Secondly, cyber threats. In the 2025-26 National Cyber Threat Assessment, they are clear. Cyber threats to Canada are escalating. State adversaries like China, Russia, and Iran are actively targeting institutions. Cybercrime, including fraud and ransomware, is increasing, and artificial intelligence is accelerating the sophistication and scale of these attacks. Over the past 4 years, at least 20 networks associated with the Government of Canada agencies and departments have been compromised by People's Republic of China cyber threat actors. The assessment also identified that Canada is a likely espionage target due to its membership to NATO, posture of support for Ukraine, and Arctic presence. Threat actors are likely targeting the Canadian government, among other sectors, and critical infrastructure networks. Further, ransomware is one of the most disruptive forms of cybercrime facing Canada and allies, with 26% average year-over-year growth. In 2023, the public sector was the third largest sector to be affected by cyber threat actors in Canada. Thirdly, economic vulnerability. Canada's economy is highly export dependent. Exports support roughly 1 in 5 Canadian jobs, yet much of our trade is concentrated in a small number of markets, creating vulnerability when trade is used as political leverage. In 2025, China imposed tariffs on certain Canadian canola products. The Canadian canola industry is worth approximately $45 billion annually and supports approximately 200,000 jobs across farming, processing, and logistics. During tariff and restriction periods, industry groups estimated direct losses of 1.5 to 2.3 billion, with additional cash flow pressures as products sat in storage and farm gate prices declined due to domestic oversupply. Similarly, recent US trade measures have demonstrated Canada's exposure. According to the Bank of Canada, Canadian good exports to the United States fell more than around 15% in April 2025, with motor vehicle and aluminum exports down roughly 25%. Around 2 million Canadian jobs rely on goods exports to the United States, and manufacturing employment in trade-sensitive sectors has declined by about 55,000 jobs since early 2025. Together, these examples show how geopolitical friction can quickly translate into job losses, sectoral disruption, and broader economic risk. And lastly, Arctic competition. Arctic warming is occurring at more than double the rate of global average. Canada's Changing Climate Report, led by Environment and Climate Change Canada, predicts that much of Canada's Arctic will experience significant ice-free conditions by 2050. In addition, Canada's Auditor General identified critical Arctic surveillance and coordination gaps in 2023. Already, we have seen ship traffic increase within Canada's Arctic waters, tripling from 1990 to 2019, with a significant amount of that being foreign vessels. Canada's Arctic foreign policy points to increasing accessibility of critical minerals in Canada's Arctic region and increased foreign interest, including China's plan for a polar Silk Road. The United States has also expressed interest in the Arctic with threats of annexing Greenland. This means that Canada's north is under direct and imminent threat. Next slide, please. So what are the risks of not responding to these threats? For disinformation, if the government does not take immediate action to address the spread of disinformation and increase Canada's digital resilience, we risk declining trust of Canadians in the government and its institutions. This will deepen social fractures and undermine our democracy. For cyber threats, state adversaries can maintain undetected access to federal systems, especially in the face of increasing AI use. Sensitive government data, including policy, trade, and intelligence, could be at risk. Further, critical services could be disrupted, which would impact delivery, directly affecting Canadians. These risks heighten during geopolitical crises. This makes cyber threats a direct risk to Canada's sovereignty and security, with damaging effects for our society. And ensuring global economic resilience. Economic interdependence can become leverage. When supply chains are concentrated and export markets are highly dependent, Canada becomes exposed to sudden economic shocks. Such shocks do not only affect businesses, they affect employment, fiscal revenues, investor confidence, and ultimately, Canada's ability to act independently in times of geopolitical tension. Lastly, Arctic competition poses a direct and urgent threat to Canada's sovereignty. Not intervening in the event of foreign presence poses a risk to our physical security. By not responding, we leave our citizens, our sovereign territory, and our critical minerals vulnerable and exposed. Next slide, please. Now we will discuss our recommendations for Canada's new national security policy. Our first recommendation is to implement a two-pronged approach to build both Canadians' capacities to identify disinformation and decrease the amount of disinformation that Canadians encounter in the first place. The first prong of this recommendation is the creation of a national digital media literacy strategy led by Public Safety Canada to strengthen the capacity of Canadians to identify disinformation. The strategy would involve funding available to provinces for the development and implementation of digital media literacy curricula in schools. This coordinated nationwide approach will ensure that Canadian children and youth are well equipped to identify disinformation in an increasingly digital world. The national strategy should also support a second phase of the Digital Literacy Exchange Program, for which federal funding ended in 2025. This program equips Canadians who face barriers to accessing digital spaces with the skills to use the internet safely, securely, and effectively. And thirdly, the national strategy should include funding to increase digital media literacy training and education available to the Canadian public. The total funding allocated to this strategy is $65 million over 4 years. Next slide, please. The second prong of this recommendation, aimed at reducing disinformation online, is to update and retable the Online Harms Act. This act was tabled in 2024, but was never passed. The act aimed to protect the public, and especially children, from harmful online content. However, it is not bold enough, failing to address the root cause, the very design of online platforms that allows the proliferation of disinformation online. We recommend that the Online Harms Act is modeled after the European Union's Digital Services Act. The updated act should include mandated actions for online platforms to decrease the spread of disinformation, including a requirement to assess and then act to reduce systemic risk, which could include mandated change to platform design features, implementing a crisis response mechanism to manage rapid disinformation spread during crises, and mandatory data sharing with governments, researchers, and auditors to support transparent identification and reduction of risks. The Act should also follow the EU's Digital Services Act enforcement model, imposing fines of up to 6% of global gross revenue to ensure compliance. Subsequently, we recommend that the Digital Safety Commission of Canada be stood up to monitor and enforce the Online Harms Act. The commission should be housed under Public Safety Canada rather than the originally proposed Department of Canadian Heritage to ensure a coordinated approach. This would be accompanied by a budget of $120 million over 3 years based on the Department of Canadian Heritage's original estimates. Next slide, please.
Cyber threats are becoming more frequent, more sophisticated, and more disruptive. Many departments manage sensitive data, critical systems, and essential services. When coordination is unclear or detection is delayed, the impact can escalate quickly, operationally, financially, as well as having devastating impacts on trust in institutions. Canada has strong departments, institutions, and measures to respond to cyber threats. The issue is not capacity, it is coordination and compliance. The October 2025 Auditor General report found serious fragmentation across federal organizations and adoption of existing cybersecurity services. 80% are not using Shared Services Canada's Enterprise Internet Service, and 36% are not using Communication Security Establishment Canada's cyber defense sensors. These gaps weaken our collective defense. Our recommendation centers on three priority areas. First, we propose that SSE and CSC develop a clear action plan supported by a cybersecurity event collaboration platform and an incident case management tool aligned with the proposed 2023 CSEMP. These measures will clarify roles, define reporting timelines, and create a secure platform for communication. The result is faster, more coordinated response during incidents. This is a medium-term initiative requiring $60 million over 3 years. Second, in alignment with the Auditor General's recommendation, we propose restoring the Security Information and Event Management, or SIEM project, to its planned scope and timeline. This will enable near real-time detection of threats, allowing us to move from a reactive to proactive defense. This investment is $80 million over 2 years. Third, we propose mandatory annual reporting to CCCS and required completion of critical cybersecurity training across federal departments. This strengthens awareness, ensures compliance, and reinforces accountability. This can be implemented in the short term using existing resources, such as the Center for Cybersecurity's education programs, as well as courses like Discover Cybersecurity from the Canada School of Public Service. Together, these measures create clearer coordination, stronger detection, and a more cyber-aware workforce. Next slide, please.
Is Portia muted?
To strengthen economic security, we propose a Canadian Economic and Security Promotion Act, modeled on Japan's 2022 economic security legislation. The Act would establish a framework built on two pillars: securing the supply of critical products and development of critical technologies. For supply chains, the Act and subsequent regulation would designate products essential to national security and trade partnerships. These are products that Canadians and our trade and defense partners require a stable supply of to maintain safety and security. This could include semiconductors, medical supplies, ship parts, fertilizers, critical minerals, and other products. Suppliers of these products will submit plans and initiatives to strengthen their supply chains. This may be done through diversification of supply sources, production capacity expansion, technological upgrades, or stockpiling where necessary. Approved plans would receive grants and interest subsidies to support implementation. For development of critical technologies, the Act and subsequent regulations would designate established and emerging technologies essential to national security and trade partnerships. These are technologies that Canadians and our trade and defense partners rely on to maintain security, competitiveness, and strategic advantage. This could be quantum computing, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, aerospace, and others. Research and development of these technologies would be supported through targeted grants and interest subsidies to researchers and institutions. Together, these measures will build resilient supply chains and competitive critical technologies, strengthening Canada's economic security. By embedding these priorities in legislation, the Act ensures sustained government action and focus, and long-term policy stability. This positions Canada as a stronger, more reliable trade and defense partner, and will ensure we always have something valuable to bring to the table. Based on Japan's implementation timeline and budget, we project a 1-year implementation timeline and a $12 billion over 4 years to fund grant and subsidy programs. Pre-allocated funding from Budget 2025 and the Defense Industrial Strategy can be aligned under the proposed Act, including the Strategic Innovation Fund, the Strategic Response Fund, and Canada Growth Fund, as well as the Canadian Critical Mineral Strategy. Next slide, please. To reduce Canada's economic vulnerability and strengthen Arctic security, we also recommend a significant expansion of investment in dual-use infrastructure projects through the Arctic Infrastructure Fund. Next slide, please. By dual-use infrastructure, we refer to transportation systems that serve both commercial and defense purposes. In normal times, these systems will be used to move goods and exports. During emergencies, they can support military deployment and national responses. One of the core challenges in the north is seasonality. For example, the Port of Churchill. The Port of Churchill is Canada's only Arctic deep water port connection to the national rail system. However, it faces structural limitations. Operations are seasonal due to ice conditions, cargo capacity is usually limited, and the Hudson Bay Railway has experienced climate-related disruptions in the past. We therefore propose expanding deep water capability to accommodate larger vessels, modernizing cargo handling systems to improve efficiency, strengthening rail reliability to reduce disruption risk, and also integrating defense-ready logistic capacity. Another area we can focus on is the expansion of the Arctic corridor. Canada's Arctic ports represent our most reliable year-round gateway to Europe. However, rising ambitions by other countries, particularly in critical minerals, combined with global trade volatility and cyber risk, require expanded capacity and improved resilience. For the Port of Churchill, we estimate the total investment required to be between $1.5 and $2.5 billion over the 4-year period. For the Atlantic Corridor expansion, we estimate the total investment required to be between $1 and $2 billion over the 4-year period. For the source of funds, the 2025 budget already allocates $1 billion to establish an Arctic Infrastructure Fund. While this is a positive step, the scale of the upgrades we are proposing will require expanding this fund to ensure it can fully support the necessary rail, ports, and transportation improvements. Next slide, please.
Investment in critical and dual-use infrastructure in the Northern Operational Support Hubs recently announced in Canada's Defence Industrial Strategy will strengthen our defence presence in the Arctic. The conversation around Arctic sovereignty highlights an important implementation challenge, however. These commitments drastically increase traffic to northern localities, many of which are remote Indigenous communities. This puts a huge strain on existing resources and capacities in areas that have already had an extremely sensitive history with Canadian defense projects. To avoid slipping down a slope towards recolonization, northern projects will not only require consultation, but direct collaboration with northern communities. We will leverage $2 million from our current defense budget allocations to Arctic community engagement. Pursuant to the Inuit Nananget policy, we seek to immediately collaborate with our Arctic communities through the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee, as outlined in our Defense Industrial Strategy. We will also begin development of a Canadian civic capacity strategy. Within the next fiscal year, we will allocate $20 million from previously announced defense recruitment and retention allocations to implement a pilot project of our Canadian civic capacity strategy in the context of Northern Operational Support Hubs. Canada already has a few initiatives where civilians can partner with our armed forces to harness local knowledge and relationships to build community within our defense landscape. Some examples of these are the Canadian Coast Guard Auxiliary and the Canadian Rangers program. In addition to expanding these civilian defense programs and partnerships, we will increase targeted recruiting to fill both civilian and contract defense positions with local community residents first. Over the next 10 years, as per the Defense Industrial Strategy, we will allocate a total of $2 billion of regular operating funds from our defense budget to expand these community partnerships. A full civic service reserve will be created. As recommended by stakeholders, we will partner with Indigenous, provincial, municipal governments, and post-secondary institutions to incentivize voluntary participation in this program. Next slide, please. We aim to communicate that we are taking a whole of Canada approach to remind the public that building strength and resiliency at home requires national participation. Everyone has a role to play in national security, and we can't do it alone. Next slide, please. To keep our nation safe, we are fostering a prepared, informed, and involved citizenry, building a whole of society security culture. Thank you for listening to our presentation. My team and I will now take questions.
We are so thankful. We just had a small break. You're halfway in the group. We're so thankful that you got together, and we hear that it is minus 30 degrees at Edmonton. Hopefully you didn't have to get all the way to the university, and some of you are at home. It's obvious that you did a lot of work and you put a lot of collaboration into this, and we're so thankful you participated. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Violetta, who has an expertise in strategy and operations.
Yeah, thank you, Noah, and thank you, team, for this presentation. You did bring up a lot of knowledge and content here that was quite insightful. And I'm going to ask you a question here around the order of things under the economic security pillar of the strategy that you presented. There were a number of areas of focus, and I'm wondering if you consider the priority of these initiatives and interventions. Do you wish to refer to the slide first? And tell us around how you thought about the priorities. What should go first? It wasn't that clear to me, but maybe if you could explain that a little more.
Yeah, we could go to slide 8. And we noticed that we do not have a very solid supply chain system in the country. So we were looking at both the supply chain and development of the critical technologies. And these are supposed to go hand in hand without leaving one behind. Because if you have even a solid supply chain, but your technologies are not robust enough to support you, especially when you are dealing with other trade partners who have their eyes on the Canadian economy, then it's going to be a bit disruptive. And when we talked about the dual infrastructure system as well, we're looking at the roads that will lead us to send these goods and services outside the country. So even though it looks like we are outlining them independently, these are things that are supposed to be done holistically to come together to help us achieve this economic security that we want.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and it says 1 year. So it's 1 year to kickstart these initiatives, and then it takes over a 4-year period.
Yeah, so it's going to be more in phases. So we're going to have from the year 1, we are going to have the legislation approved, and then we can build on that gradually till the year 4 period.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Violetta, and thanks so much. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Vincent, with some specialty around foreign policy and allies and the Arctic, and he may have a question related to one of those.
Thanks very much, Noah, and thank you for the presentation. Really appreciate it. A couple of questions. I didn't see the United States anywhere in this strategy. Is it implicated? We've had a number of discussions up to this point about the US as a potential threat, the threat to Canadian sovereignty, etc. So would the US play into any of these 3 areas that you've focused on? And then you talk a little bit about the risks at the front end in terms of if you don't do something in these areas, what the risks will be. But what about the risks in terms of implementation of these specific initiatives? What are some of the potential challenges in implementing some of these initiatives, and what would be the mitigation strategies, if you could just name 1 or 2? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Minister. Absolutely, the US factors into all of the pillars that we are considering, looking from the disinformation and cybersecurity piece. We're mentioning that the threats are coming from a number of foreign actors, including the United States, bringing misinformation into the Canadian system, as well as coordinated cyber attacks. Also looking at the Arctic and the US interest there. Trump has made threats to Greenland for the annexation of Greenland, as we mentioned. And so we are considering US foreign interference into the Canadian Arctic, and looking at the economy as well, looking at the tariffs that the US has leveraged against Canada, and the massive impact that the US current approach to trade relations with Canada has had on the economy. The US is certainly a central pillar for all four of the considerations that we're bringing up.
Yeah.
In terms, oh,
maybe if I could add just a single point to that, and that is how come even for our economic strategy, we are looking at diversification. So we are not going to now concentrate, because we notice that most of our goods are concentrated in a market, which is typically the US. So if we are going to diversify and have other supply chains and also have routes that would take us to Europe and other areas, that would be a more solid strategy than having just one concentrated market, which is typically the US. Yeah. Hannah, please go on. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. And
Thanks so much.
Just on the risks a little bit, or was that part of your answer on the risks?
I can hop onto that question if we want to move to slide 10, please. Yes, in some of the challenges of implementing a lot of our Arctic sovereignty solutions, looking to Canada's Arctic policy, the defense industrial strategy that was just released this week, a lot of these are really focused on putting boots on the ground, which I think is really good. Speaking to the first part of your question, as we have had the 51st state rhetoric coming from our neighbors downstairs, threats of annexing Greenland, it is good to strengthen our presence in the Arctic, but with this increased presence comes a lot of risk of like recolonization rhetoric towards Northern Indigenous communities. So something that we've come up with to mitigate this is our solution of community engagement, which is not only suggested, but also we figure required through the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee is going to be our first immediate engagement vessel. And then going forward, we're going to look to have as many people engaged in both civilian and defense roles as possible.
Thank you so much. Conscious of time, I'm going to actually take the next question. I was looking through your strategy. I was sort of mentally adding it all up, and it's your first three are about, I don't know, $400 million. Then you have 12 billion on the economic security promotion and 2.2 on Arctic sovereignty. Can you comment on, is this new money? Is this repurposed money? Where does it come from? What are the fiscal implications?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I'm happy to hop on and speak specifically to the cybersecurity recommendation. If we could go to slide 7, please. Great, thank you so much. So these funds, I pulled them out of existing budgets. So looking specifically at SSC, they have about a $2.6 billion budget, and they have an allocated fund specifically for cybersecurity. The Government of Canada in the 2022 budget did allocate between over $280 million for modernizing cybersecurity services, and they also proposed the clear action plan for the collaboration platform, as well as the security information and management system. However, both of those projects were put on hold. And so the funds did exist for both of these projects, as well as a proposed implementation and timeline. As both the projects got about 50% of the way there in terms of the funding timeline, we propose that these funds come from within SSC. And then going back a little bit to the risk question in terms of the manual reporting, we would be utilizing existing resources, and I recognize the onus that this would put on the public service for increased reporting. But thinking ahead and looking forward, it's essential to ensure that the public service is cyber safe and has a secure culture. This is a preventative form of addressing these issues instead of the potential fiscal consequences of disruptions later on to service delivery. So that was the rationale behind the funding there.
And the big ticket item is this 12 billion over 4 years for your first priority initiative. Is that new or?
For the cyber threats?
No, for the economic security.
Oh, economic security. I apologize. I'll pass that to Portia. Thank you.
Yeah, so if we could go to slide 8 again, maybe I could take a look at that. Okay, so we actually did a bit of a calculation based again on Japan's implementation, but when we look at the 2025 budget, there's actually a pre-allocated funding for the defense industrial strategy, and we are proposing that this could indirectly be aligned under this proposed act. And we also looked at the Strategic Innovation Fund, which is available. We have the Canada Critical Mineral Strategy, and we are thinking that the Canada Growth Fund as well, if we're able to consolidate these and have some of these bits and pieces coming from there, we can actually be able to align that under this proposed act.
Thank you very much. We are at time, and we will see you at the awards ceremony.